Hello everyone. Today I have the privilege of talking to Gavin Boby of, amongst other things, the Law and Freedom Foundation, and we're going to discuss his various campaigning activities as well as the effects of Islamisation in general. Hello Gavin, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Hi Simon, nice to meet you.
Great. Okay, to give my viewers a little bit of context, as you know, I'm here in Barcelona, and to be perfectly honest, I didn't really know what was happening in the UK, and I didn't know very much about Gavin. But there are plans here to build a grand mosque in Barcelona, and I was whinging about this, getting very upset, and people said to me, the guy you need to talk to is Gavin Boby. So I did a little bit of research into your background, and I found that you were the mosque buster himself. So in order to give it a little bit of context, can you tell the viewers how you got involved in this, what your work of mosque busting involves, really?
Yes. I suppose to go back a long way, when I was about 18, I did a bit of travelling from London through India, going overland through Turkey, Pakistan, Kashmir and Iran, even nipping very briefly into Afghanistan. And developed a very realistic picture of Islam, what an unpleasant place it was, particularly countries like Pakistan, which I'd say is probably the most unpleasant country that I've been to. And these countries were unpleasant not because of the landscape or the climate, they're unpleasant because of the people, and the people were unpleasant because of the effect that the religion had on them. It was quite a shock. And so I thought Islam, there's something wrong with this religion. As soon as you go into an Islamic area, an Islamic country, things get unpleasant. And then when September 11th happened, I thought, right, I've got to look at the doctrine, have a look at what's in the doctrine, what is it that's driving people? And again, that's a shock because it is such sort of concentrated, distilled bellicosity, sort of warlike aggression and hatred, that I was really quite shocked. Well, first of all, that it could be like that, and that could be such a widespread religion, and secondly, that no one said anything about it when it's right there jumping off every page.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? I'd read the Quran. I'm on my 4th reading of the Quran now because I want to get this memorized and I want to have it at my fingertips in order to belt out at people. But and when I first read the Quran, you get a growing sense of dread as each verse. Particularly, I mean, once you get into Surah 2, I mean, because there's hard hitting stuff right at the beginning, and this is absolutely terrible. And then you walk around and tell people, and nobody believes you, and they say things like, "Well, it's no worse than the Old Testament." Well, I think it's quite significantly worse than the Old Testament, really.
Totally different. The Old Testament is full of stories. So and so begat so and so. God said to Abraham, and so had adultery with this person. That's not, and that doesn't then say so and so committed adultery, therefore you must commit adultery, or Abraham was prepared to sacrifice his son, therefore you must kill your son. It doesn't mean that at all. There's so much interpretation in it, and the same with the New Testament. Jesus said this. Why did he say this? This disciple said that. Why? What's the meaning? What's the lesson for us? Within Islam, there isn't. These are rules, direct commandments sent down for all people, for all time. The only equivalent within the Old Testament is the 10 Commandments. If you imagine that the whole of Islamic doctrine, the whole of the Quran, is the 10 Commandments. They're dictated to Moses on the mountaintop, and he brings them down. Similarly, with the Quran, that's dictated to Muhammad, and then he makes them available. It's the word of God. You have to obey it. Full stop. That is the source code, and it always comes back to the source code, like the source code of a virus on your computer. You have to ask what it says. If it says take over your hard drive, destroy everything else on it, you've got to get that virus off your computer. It doesn't matter if it's mimicking something harmless, and that is what Islam says, and it's incredibly, almost absurdly, comically warlike. I have a friend who has a drinking game, which he calls it the Quran game, which is you open the Quran at any page, and if it says something laughably horrific, then the other guy has to drink something. And and this mate of mine, he reckons he has never lost playing that game because people think, oh, it can't be that bad, and they open a page and there's something horrible there, and they have to buy the drinks.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I said, my first metaphor that was after a day of reading was, it's like the 10 Commandments on amphetamines, really, because it's just it's throwing it's throwing hatred at you. Okay, let's move specifically on to your work, which is basically, you told me that you're a planning lawyer and you're involved in stopping the planning permission being given to mosques. How did you get involved in that?
Oh, really through friends. Friends had a similar interest, a similar sort of counter-jihad interest and a concern about Islam. And people said to me, "Oh, you ought to stop mosques getting planning permissions. You deal with planning permissions." My initial reaction was, "No, I don't want a busman's holiday." And also, it will be pointless. There is no way I will ever win a case. They want those mosques in place. I'll lose everyone. What's the point fighting losing battles? And eventually somebody asked me, and that was in Maidenhead. It's up on YouTube. It's a very, very poor quality video. But I went along and did it and said my bit. And there was hardly anyone there. And it was a very civilized planning council meeting, as they usually tend to be, when they're not dealing with mosque planning applications, when the atmosphere is electric. But this one, you had just a few local people there and a bunch of mob-handed coppers. And I was looking around thinking, why? Because the authorities know what the problem is with Islam. They say they don't, but they do know. And so I was thinking, why are there a bunch of mob-handed coppers here? And I thought, well, I guess they're here to drag me off after I've done my little hate speech in front of the planning council saying why planning permission shouldn't be granted, please, members of the council. So that will get me dragged off to jail. And that didn't happen. And we won. The council refused it. And I was astonished. So actually, I walked up to the guy from the Muslim outfit, or the mosque outfit, who wanted the planning permission, and I thought, well, within the law, within sportsmanship generally, the winner commiserates with the loser. So you walk up to him and say, well, thank you and good luck. And as I was doing, I sort of stuck my chin out of it. Thought, is he going to hit me? And he was furious, but he didn't hit me. So that was, it all went well. We won. I didn't get arrested. I didn't get punched. And then I thought, well, I'll keep doing this. And I kept doing it and kept most of the time winning. So the success rate now is a little bit over 70%. I think actually it should be a bit higher. There was a rash of a few losses in 2015 because I was experimenting with method. It's trial and error, what method works. And I think I've got the method sharpened down. So I'd say probably I'd feel my success rate at the moment ought to be about 80%, which is good. If I had the funding to go after every mosque in the country, that would be not quite a total ban, but probably a better ban than the state could achieve if the state enacted very strict legislation prohibiting mosques or the construction of new mosques, because they wouldn't get up to 80% success rate, and I think I would. So it's been successful, and well, I can go into the reasons for that in a minute if you want to.
I basically, before we get into that, I really want to get you to explain why mosques are such a bad thing. There's 2 points of view to this, really. Why are they so bad from the local residents' point of view? Obviously, I'm here in Catalonia. We're broadcasting this all over the world. So not everybody is in Maidenhead or in the UK who knows, not everybody knows what effects a mosque has on their local neighbourhood. And I've heard you explain this very, very graphically. So I wonder if you could do this for my audience.
Well, what I've noticed is a mosque is about territory. Mosques delineate territory in the way that fortresses delineated territory in the medieval world. So if the English king wanted to establish a foothold in Wales, he built a castle there, and that says, I'm here and I'm staying. Mosques have a similar effect. It's about taking over, as the Quran and Islamic doctrine commands Muslims to do. The effects on a neighbourhood, and this is what I noticed, it's quite shocking. I've managed to sort of to distill this down into what I call the 4 stages of Islamization. And the first stage is the parking jihad, which isn't too bad as jihad goes. You don't get your head cut off. You just get a lot of really, really aggressive bad parking in your area. And effectively what it means is, if you want to go shopping, if your commute takes you out during mosque hours, you're in trouble. You're not going to get out along that road. It's going to be a problem, and that is about establishing territory. And if you say, could you please move your car, you'll be told it's only for an hour or two. Tough. Okay, so that's the first stage, and the second stage is F off, Mrs. This is our area now, because that's what the Muslim gentleman, the polite, devout Muslim gentleman, says to the local non-Muslim ladies when they say, "Excuse me, I hate to be a bother, but would you mind please moving your car and not parking it inside my driveway? I'm trying to go out. I've got to go to hospital. I've got a doctor's appointment. Would you mind moving your car, please?" And they're told, "F off, Mrs. This is our area now." Okay, so that's stage 2. That comes a few years down the line. Actually, remarkably fast, faster than you'd think. And then the third stage is what I call the polythene bag stage, because that is when you get a couple of very polite Muslim gentlemen knocking on your door, particularly if you're elderly and you own a property that's nearby, and they'll knock on your door and say, "Do you want to sell your house?" And there'll be a bunch of tenors and 20s in the carrier bag or in the briefcase. "Do you want to sell your house?" "No." "Well, we've got this bag of money, we'll give you this." "I wouldn't sell it for that, and anyway, it's not for sale." And the response that I'm told, what I've been told so a number of times about this, is that what you're offered is a ridiculous amount of money, somewhere between a quarter and a half of its value, usually about a third of its value. And when you say, "Look, it's not for sale," you are told you are going to have to sell sometime, and no white person will buy from you. It's as crude and blunt as that. And of course, if you imagine you're a retired pensioner, you've had the short end of the stick all your life, and now you're just hoping for a nice retirement with your garden. You bought a property 50 years ago, and now it's worth a bit of money and you're quite enjoying it, and then this happens to you on top of everything else that's going on in the neighborhood. It is scary. And then of course you might go to your counsellor or the police and say, "This is happening to me," and they know what's going on, but they don't want to hear from you. They just do not want to know. There's no problem there. And the fourth stage that I've heard about is the "we have no reason to believe there's any racial element to this crime, madam." And you can imagine that's what the police say to you when your broadband cable gets cut, when someone backs their car into your gate post, or when a window gets smashed, or something comes through your letterbox, and you go and you think, "This isn't happening to everyone around here. Why is this happening to me?" And you go to the police. "Sorry, madam, we have no reason to believe there's any racial element to this crime," which they'll say, "It's just petty vandalism, happens all the time, madam, get used to it." And long before that, and if they come to me, I've had people coming to me asking me that, and it's really sad. And I just say, all I can say to them is, you have to move before you get to stage 4, and move long before that. As soon as there is planning permission for a mosque in your area, move, get out, because the value will only go down. And of course it will go down, because a lot of people won't buy near a mosque, even if they have no problem with Islam. They will notice, well, that's going to deflate the value of properties around here, so I won't buy around here. So people just have to get out fast from their individual point of view. So that is very unpleasant.
Yeah, there's something in one of my recent videos. I was complaining about how incessant Islam is. It's like Chinese water torture. There's a kind of drip. They can, and it's from all elements of society. They seem to be continually pushing the boundaries at all times. I imagine this is what happens if you've got a mosque near you, because they consider this to be their territory. Something else that I've seen you talk about is the etymology of the word mosque. There's a massive difference between the meaning behind the word mosque, I can't remember what examples you used, and the meanings of the words like church and temple. A church is a place where these are places of worship where you adore God, whereas a mosque is something different. Can you remember what the etymology of this is?
I think a mosque comes from the word masjid, which comes from the Arabic word sajada, which means to prostrate yourself. So a mosque is a place of prostration, physical prostration. That's about power and dominance. You are dominated by God, and therefore you go out and dominate other people. It's a chain of dominance, sajada, to prostrate. A church comes from the Greek word kyriake, which I think means the Lord's house, I think. And temple comes from the word templum, which means a place that's fit for the taking of auspices. Basically, it's fit for devotion and devotional worship. I mean, it's totally different from a mosque, which is about physical prostration. You wouldn't call a Catholic church, where sometimes people kneel in front of the altar, you wouldn't call it a place of kneeling. I mean, that would be quite shocking if I said that to a Catholic. Your church is just a place of kneeling. Or if you said that in Catalonia to people, I think the Catholics there would be quite offended by that term. So I mean, it's completely different. It's dominance and physical dominance like that.
And it's all about obedience. I mean, it comes in the name. It's all about obedience and submission, which is why they prostrate themselves.
Can I? If I sorry, and that is intrinsic. That is right at the heart of Islam and the motivation for following Islam, and also the reason why Islam, I think, will fail. It is about, Islam is not a doctrine about salvation or happiness or goodness. It is a doctrine of success. So this has been set out by a gentleman, an Australian gentleman called Mark Dury, and he points out that within Christian doctrine, you are sort of sinful, fallen. You seek guidance from God or redemption, and as a result, you receive salvation. Within Islam, you're uninformed. You get right guidance, and you achieve success. And success is defined in very, very worldly terms, having lots of girlfriends, or basically lots of slaves, sex slaves, really. Even in heaven, you see, is it 72 virgins, and I forget how many it is. But and that's and you'll also have a lot of other slaves catering to you. You'll have a lot of money and treasure that you've been able to force out of other people. That is success. So the whole thing is very worldly. It's about success, and that success is defined in terms of dominance, in terms of physical force over other people, to force them to give you what you want for its own sake. And that is the reason why I think Islam that's where it will fail. If you clad Islam in failure, if you force it to stew in its own juice, in its own failure, then people will say, well, this is the reason to follow Islam, is because it brings us success, and all it's bringing us is failure. We're not going to follow it anymore. And that is what needs to happen, to make it fail and to make it obvious that it has failed.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. I really recommend you search for Gavin's videos on internet. There's various ones with Vlad Tepes and Jamie Glazov, because sometimes I get frustrated about this. It seems like a never-ending battle, and my battle is mainly verbal. But I have to admit, watching you, I end up feeling much more optimistic.
Yes.
I mean, you give the impression that the battle can be won. I was thinking about this morning. What we really need, though, is 50 Gavin Bobys all doing the same job, because there's an element of people inevitably get taken out by the system, and it is a clash of civilizations. It's an existential battle that we're in, and we have to fight it. But I also think, I mean, people are banding words like fascist and Nazi at me now. One of the reasons why I like to have this picture in the background of my face is the idea that I'm a Nazi is just so absurd as to be just nobody can take it possibly seriously. But people will try to take us out, because I think we're involved in a fight on this.
Yes.
In order to get back to I think this is a very interesting process, because a mosque is a territorial statement from Islam, and it's a territorial statement in your area, and it's basically the bastion, as you said earlier, the castle. It's the center of the colonization that's going to take place. Okay. Let's roll this back a bit. What should people be doing if they don't want mosques built in their area? Because it involves quite a lot of vigilance on the part of local residents, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, yes. What people can do is just watch their council, research their council planning application lists to see planning applications that are coming through. Particularly, the words you look out for are community centre. There are no mosques in this country. They're all community centres, okay? Possibly community centres with prayer facilities.
And multi-faith facilities is another big one.
Yes. Usually it's a community. Well, if you look for the word community centre or multi-faith or prayer, okay, look for those words and look early, because local authorities want to pass these things on the quiet. And the phrase I use is councils want to pass planning applications for mosques like the vicar wants to pass gas at high tea. Just wants to do it on the quiet, so no one. And that's the way they behave. And they'll try and mislabel. And I've got one at the moment where they really tried so hard. They bent over backwards to label this application as anything other than a religious use application, and we caught them out on it. And to look at their fumbling emails as they try and justify their mistake. There is a comical side to this. Anyway, so. But you have to be really vigilant. It's a tedious old task doing it. I can tell you that. And local authority websites are not user friendly, and so. But if you can get hold of a planning application for a mosque early, and then bring it to me, then I can help people or direct the campaign against it. It's not brilliant or technical, but it does require experience. The problem also is it's about, I don't know, 600 quid, 750 quid per go. That money doesn't go to me. That's third-party expenses. Just in order to let local people know what is happening, to give local people the opportunity to express their lawful views as is required and mandated by the system. That is what councils are hoping to avoid by keeping it on the quiet, on the down low. And once you can let people know, people will express their views on it, because my day job is dealing with planning permissions. And I've often heard people say, I wish we had a nice big Sainsbury's or a nice big IKEA around here, or wish we had a community centre around here, they might say. I've never heard no one will ever say, you will never hear anyone say, I wish we had a nice big mosque around here. I mean, they're just not going to say it. They know what it means for them. And local authorities, I think the politician, well, we can go into this later. I think politicians actually want this to happen. It's in their interests for this to go ahead, in their own selfish interests. So there is a fight on, but probably the ideal thing, realistically, is what I need is a big sugar daddy funder who will fund me enough. Not me personally, but will fund me enough to pay the expenses to get someone else to do the researching, to find these places right across the country early. You need to find them early, because councils are quick off the mark when it comes to mosque applications. They pass them fast if they can. Yeah. So somebody to find them early, and then I can go, and then so I'm able to come up with all those expenses to fight them right across the country. About, may say, 750 quid a go, third-party expenses, not to me, but to third party, in order to allow ordinary people, wherever there is a mosque application raising its head, to allow people to express their opinion. And on that basis, that's all people need to do. And on that basis, if I can project what I suspect might be an 80% success rate right across the country, that is equivalent to a nationwide halt on mosque building. Now, I'm not sort of I don't like coming on your show and appearing to be doing a fundraising drive. If you want to cut this bit out, you can. That's not my. I'm comfortable that people are not there yet. Lot of people, most people just don't have the money, but people are not. The mentality isn't there yet, and I accept that. So just work with what I've got. In the meantime, for ordinary people who are ordinary battlers who are struggling to make ends meet, just let me know early and find somewhere. I am not going to pay out of my own pocket all the expenses of all the mosque applications up and down the country. But if you can do it in your neighbourhood, then tell me, and we'll go into action. And chances are, to my surprise, we'll win. I always think we're going to lose every case when we go into it, and most of the time we seem to win, though. And anyway, that's the long answer.
And also, having watched you in action, I will do a little bit of publicity for you. Having watched you in action, I mean, having someone who really knows the ropes in these planning committees? Because there are a few videos of you in planning committees where you're a professional lawyer. You know what you're talking about. It's not just some bloke from the community. I mean, these battles have to be fought in a formal fashion in order to be won, I think.
Yes, and particularly the councillors need to know that they're going to have to account for their decisions. At the moment, they're hiding behind the fog of political correctness. And one of the things they've got to know is their names are against these decisions. When they grant planning permission, and one day that politically correct fog will get blown away. And so, I mean, what I like to say to those councillors is, you be certain what you fear, because one day you might find yourself on the wrong end of a legal claim, and you might find yourself facing me in a bad mood, and don't think there's going to be any sympathy for you. They need to know that. They need to be told that.
Right on, Mr. Mosquebuster.
Well,
yeah, I mean, people need to realise that there are consequences for actions, and the weak-kneed politicians want, at some point, this, as you've said very very frequently, at some point this political climate is going to turn around, and people are going to be looking for responsibilities, I think.
Yeah, if I can disagree with you, I don't think it's about them being weak-kneed. I think it is about them being cynical and self-serving. I think politicians, the political class in general, and all the apparatchiks, the hangers on, the sort of the complex around them, they want Islam, they like Islam precisely because it has all those bad effects. Those bad effects, people seeing their communities no longer being home, the fact that young women start to feel intimidated and harassed and a little bit unsafe, the fact that everyone is divided, those are not unfortunate byproducts of an otherwise humane policy. Those things are the policy, and the reason is because it makes us easier to rule. If you govern, you want people to be easy to rule, particularly when you have big government, as we do now, of a size that kind of rivals the size of Soviet government. They want to make people more manageable, and Islam is great for doing that because its influence is so poisonous and so divisive, and it gives all kinds of power and status to politicians. I suspect that this interview is going to go down those lines in a minute, so I won't concentrate on that at the moment.
Yeah.
But people should not think this is ignorance on the part of politicians. It is cynicism, unscrupulous cynicism.
And that takes us on very naturally to another part of your campaigning activities, which revolves around the euphemistically called Muslim grooming gangs. They're not Muslim grooming gangs. I'm really sick of euphemisms, actually. They're violent Muslim rape gangs. And you wrote the foreword to Peter McLaughlin's fantastic Easy Meat book. And in many ways, superficially, the two issues don't seem to be linked. But once you know a little bit about Islam and its objectives, I think they're totally linked, as you've hinted at before. Can you tell us a little bit about the book and why it's so incredibly important, which it definitely is?
It's the definitive book on the Muslim rape gangs. I call them the rape and torture gangs, the rape war gangs. And it's the book doesn't call them that, but I do. It is the definitive book on that. It goes through all the cases up to about 2 years ago, and also the attitudes of local authorities and some charities. And it just breaks it down and looks at the bare facts and says there has been one huge cover-up here. And also it brings out the extraordinary viciousness of the gangs and the deliberate obfuscation by the authorities in response to it. So council memos going around saying, under no circumstances must anyone mention the ethnicity of the offenders. And this has got, we are telling you, the council bosses are telling you, council employees, this has got nothing to do with race or ethnicity, and you had damn well better not mention that. I mean, really laying down the three-line whip on that issue. And meanwhile, you just get hundreds or thousands of girls terribly abused, which from my it also brings out the numbers as well, and because we have no data, government's provided no data. The book attempts to bring out what data we can, particularly by saying there's no reliable research into this. Government won't look at it, won't provide any data. So all we can go on is the cases that have been tested under the spotlight of the court ruling, and so that's where fact-finding has taken place. And if you do the maths, you look at rates per 100,000 of the population, from my calculation, that those convictions reveal that a Muslim man is between 150 and 200 times more likely than a non-Muslim man to commit this on-street grooming gang, rape gang, offence against children. Hugely, massively more likely to do that. And I suspect also the figures suggest that a majority of, this isn't me suggesting, this is the figures, they appear to indicate that a majority of rape-aged Muslim men, that means Muslim men between about the age of 18 and 40 or 18 and 42, the majority of rape-age Muslim men do this. That's what the figures that we have so far reveal. People need to understand how serious this problem is. And the problem I have with it is, firstly, it's the viciousness against girls, 12 and 13-year-old girls. A lot of the crimes are so vicious. They're not sexual behaviour that a normal man recognises as sexual behaviour. No one gets sexual pleasure nailing a 14-year-old girl's tongue to a table, or raping a 15-year-old with a broken bottle so that she can never have children again, or with a hand on the base.
Her with the word N. I mean, yes, there's appalling. And one of the things that disturbs me about the way, the way society's changed. I think you and I must be from a similar generation, and there was a time where, in normal conversation, and I'm being completely politically incorrect here, but my daughter's 23 now. 10 years ago, if something had happened like this had happened to, or if anybody had touched a hair on her head, I think I would have been perfectly reasonable to be as violent as possible. You know, what I'm not going to say it live on air, but what I think should be done to rapists, and particularly the rapists of children, there should be no holds barred, really. And it seems to me that the society has gotten to the stage of that people are being excused for the most appalling crimes, and I just don't know where society's gone, really.
Yes, I think I don't know if that's if you're asking that question about Muslim criminality or about criminality in general. It's dangerous. People need to see retribution, because people need to know that wrongdoers are losers, and then if you do that, you can get into a virtuous cycle where criminals are not only disliked but despised. They're held in contempt, and that means that people who might be tempted to go into crime actually think, well, I don't want to be despised by everyone around me. So there needs to be, it's the phrase, justice needs to be done and seen to be done. People need to see that the wrongdoer suffers. And I think that is one of the purposes of law. You can say, well, what's the purpose? There's no point to retribution. It has no, but we are not plaster saints, so we need to see it. And that's why I think the soft peddling about the Muslim rape gangs is so dangerous, because I think we are going to win against Islam. I think that is, personally, I think it's unavoidable. I think we will win. My motivation, which might surprise you for doing this, is not that I think we will lose. It's that I think we might win but disgrace ourselves in the process. As an English guy, I'm very proud of the fact we haven't had massacre on English soil for many centuries. We don't really resort to massacre. We don't like it. Whereas pretty much every other continent, including continental Europe, are terrible. Awful massacre. And I don't want to see us resorting to massacre or really violent very, very violent ethnic cleansing as a result of this. And the problem with rape as a weapon of war, which is what the Muslim rape gangs are doing, the problem with that is we are hardwired to respond violently to that. That's a Darwinistic urge to want to kill the person who rapes the person from an outside group who comes to rape your daughter. That is a Darwinistic thing. You want to respond. And I can certainly see at some stage, if people say, well, we're going to run down a street of Muslim-owned houses and set fire to them, and so someone like me, and you and I, who are currently called the most evil fascists in the world, we might say, you can't do that. It doesn't accomplish anything. It's wrong. Don't do that. And the response I think I would get is, well, they rape our children. Get out of my way. And the anger that it stokes up is uncontrollable, which is why I think these rape offences need to be treated as national security threat, because not just an organised crime thing, but something that threatens national security, because the response they're intended to provoke, and that they will provoke, is a response of extreme lawless violence that can just break down the whole sort of civil polity. And if they were treated that way, they could be dealt with much more aggressively.
Yeah, this is something I've been thinking. I'm very, very interested in history, and the history of Catalonia in Spain is particularly interesting. All this stuff about violence, make no mistake about it, there's nothing heroic. I know a great deal about the Spanish Civil War and the dreadful effects that this had on Catalan society. Barcelona was one of the centres of the Spanish Civil War. The left-wing revisionism that, the left were the goodies. No, the first 6 months of the Civil War, when the far left and the anarchists were killing priests, and the Catalan government had to help conservatives and people who were supporting Franco escape in boats out of the port. Otherwise, they would have been slaughtered. That's one thing. And another thing I've been thinking about quite a lot is the Inquisition, for example. I've completely reviewed my opinion on the Inquisition. The Inquisition obviously was a very logical response to 800 years of Muslim presence on the Iberian Peninsula. Unfortunately, though, once you release the monster, you've released the monster. And, I mean, this is I'm certainly not apologizing for anything that the Inquisition did, but looking very closely at the history and what was leading up to it, and the fact that the Ottoman threat was happening at the same time, the Inquisition was a completely logical response. Unfortunately, the moment you do that, it gets completely out of hand.
I think it goes wider than that. You look at slavery and genocide. You look at slavery. The Muslims come to Spain, enslave Spaniards. Spaniards then go to America and Latin America, and what do? Well, this has happened to us, we can do it to them. They go out there, and I think one of the main methods, you walk up to a tribe, and you get the chief to kiss the Bible, and if he doesn't, you cut his head off and enslave everyone in the tribe. That is right out of the Quran. That's not out of Christian doctrine. There's nothing in Christian doctrine saying that. That's right. So slavery goes to America, and then the Northern Europeans go over and find, actually, well, it's not us. It's already here. The slavery's already here. We might as well take advantage of it. And gradually, the Northern Europeans who haven't had that enslavement think there's something wrong here. I think we better get rid of it. And eventually, and it takes centuries to get rid of the atrocity of slavery. Similarly, and you look at with the English involvement in the slave trade. I mean, it's called sometimes referred to as the second wave of the slave trade, where after a century, the whole of the 17th century and early 18th century, English people getting enslaved by North Africans, and suddenly saying, well, actually, why not allow it? They're doing it to us. Why not go and trade then? And similarly with genocide as well. Germans learning it from Iraqis and the Ottomans, and then finding out how to do it, which is a bit more complicated than you might think. That it's about getting people on trains, which the Ottomans had worked out, and so they think, well, this is quite useful. We can do it as well. And this is what happens. You mix with the wrong crowd, you pick up their habits, which is
precisely what we don't want to do. Getting back onto finishing with the topic of the rape gangs, do you have any advice for, if parents suspect this is happening to their daughter? Is there a procedure? or does this? It's beginning. The police are beginning to react now, aren't they? But what can be done? What can a concerned parent do?
Uh, I am not as convinced as you that these cases are getting taken as seriously as they need to. I've read too many reports of towns like Rochdale and Rotherham where there's been a huge, great outcry, never again. And there was an article by Mark Stein recently where he said he went, I think it might have been Rotherham, where he was told it goes on in this area, so he goes and stands by the roadside and he sees the Muslim men in their white and gold Audis going up and down the street with very young pubescent and prepubescent girls in the back seat. So I am not sure that the police are taking this as seriously as they should, because a 12 or 13-year-old girl or 14, 15-year-old girl might not even realise this is wrong or that a crime has been committed. So it'll be quite difficult to deal with, or it might be quite difficult, obstreperous and difficult to deal with from a legal point of view. And so the police can say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. She's out of control. And I suspect that's still going on. I think if you suspect that your daughter is being abused by a rape gang, I suspect it's probably too late. What can you? Well, naturally, you should report it to the authorities. You probably would then have to mobilise a lot of political support in behind you. So you have to go to your councillors, your MPs, any political authority that there is around the police to make sure the police do their job and that there is a result. I'm not optimistic at the moment that it would have very much effect. I suspect it's a question of the same as what I say to people: if there's a mosque in your area, move while you can still sell. I'd probably say to these parents, the main thing is just to look after your daughter. That might again mean moving, but try and get her talking, keep her talking, and that's you've got to do it yourself. You're not going to get a lot of help from the authorities.
I mean, this kind of naturally brings us on to the next point, which is the complicity of the authorities. Really, it seems to be police, local authorities, politicians in particular. You were suggesting earlier that it's for cynical reasons. It's for political benefit. I mean, I can understand this at governmental level, the whole big government level, but local authorities really. Do local politicians have as much, and police and social services have as much to benefit from this?
Well, senior policemen are basically they are politicians. Their job is to help politicians get elected. But if you talk to any junior cop or a constable or a sergeant, the people you say, who do you dislike most in your job, they will all say it's the senior policeman. They don't care about conditions for police officers. They don't care about policing on the street. They care about sucking up to the politicians. And I've heard this said about NHS bosses. If you have a big state, that will happen. The senior bureaucrats will get politicized. They become the apparatchiks, and it's a nice gig for them. They get nice pay. They might get a little title at the end of it. With councillors, what I noticed with modern councillors, my mum was an elected councillor who chaired a planning committee as a councillor, and before that my granddad did as well. He was a councillor who chaired the local planning committee, so I feel I'm entitled to say bad things about councillors. They actually were, I think they were very good councillors, but in the last decade or so, councillors have started getting paid, and I reckon if I was bent and unscrupulous for money, I would aim to, and I was prepared to fiddle expenses, I'd aim to clear about 40 grand and probably miss it. I reckon I could clear about 30 grand a year. And I'd aim to keep my hours under 4 hours a day doing that. I reckon I could do that. 2 or 3 hours a day, I reckon. Yeah. And so that's imagine if you're retired, that's a nice second pension. You get a fancy handle and you get invited out to places. It's quite pleasant. So they want to stay on the gravy train and make it easy. And I can state it that there's a phrase from Jung, which is, if you don't know why, if you can't see why somebody's doing something, just look at the result. And now I've heard, and the result here is a lot of degradation of British society, a lot of division, a lot of fear, a lot of a sense of people of hostility that politicians somehow have to be called on to manage, and a lot of guilt as well, politics of guilt, all of that, a lot of nasty propaganda that nobody believes, which is the purpose of propaganda, just to humiliate you, to take away your integrity by getting you to agree to stuff that no one can possibly believe. And Islam is a religion of peace. Diversity is our strength. All these rubbish nonsense. And so what you look at is, well, what is the reason? And I think all those things are the reason. My evidence for that is, first of all, if you look at over the last 20 years, whenever people have been polled, been asked what is the most serious threat, the most serious problem that this country faces, they usually within the top two, certainly within the top three, you will get immigration. We need to substantially cut immigration, and usually it's quite high. Somewhere between about 65 or 85% of the people want to significantly cut immigration, and yet the politicians say they're having to fight for every vote, but they will not pay. None of them will pay any attention to that. Why not? Why are they throwing away all those votes? But what's the reason? The other one is, if you look at the current migrant crisis, you've had all these European politicians about 5, 6, 7 years ago saying multiculturalism is over, it has failed. Suddenly they rediscovered it again. Suddenly it's a brilliant success. And you're having, it's the scale and the specificity of that action that so many young, fighting age, unemployable Muslim males, illiterate in their own language, have no chance of getting a job, that they are being shipped over and encouraged, and NGOs are being encouraged and permitted to ship them over in millions. What is the reason for something so destructive? You can't. There is no reason, and you have to look. Well, what's in it for them? What I see is in it for them is people become really, really easy to rule, and also for the definition of being British is now your political ruler, because a migrant, one of those migrants, who may be fond of little boys in public swimming pools, or, I don't know, defecating in the swimming pool. I mean, he wants nothing in common with me. He has no intention, anything in common. He despises. And I don't have anything in common with him, and it's not likely to happen. What we have in common is the passport and the fact that we share the same politicians. That's about, which is one hell of an elevation for those politicians, and it gives them an awful lot of power, and it grinds people down. Every violent husband, every violent boyfriend, every neighborhood thug, every Timbuk dictator, Mao, Stalin, what they know is if you grind people down, they become more manageable. So a violent husband will say, if I take her money off her, if I beat her up often enough and hard enough, if I separate her out from all her friends, if I deny her sense of identity, you're nothing without me kind of attitude, then that's not going to repel her. That will make her more dependent on me. That will make her just cling all the more tightly to me. And don't tell me those politicians are not smart enough to know that. So I think it is deliberate. And I think this is part of a pattern within larger organizations, that the bigger an organization becomes, the more it focuses on its own interests instead of the interests of the people it's supposed to be representing.
Yeah. I mean, I find it difficult, but basically because my moral position is so different from this, it kind of implies that there's a heck of a lot of psychopaths and sociopaths around, which. The question is, to what extent is it malicious, cynical people, and to what extent is an unworkable system that gets people trapped in it? And I suppose the next question is, if you assume that it's a combination probably of those two things, what can be done to fight against it? Because more and more people are coming, and unfortunately, I'm sorry for this longish question. And unfortunately, another thing that I find is lots of the people that have turned me into a persona non grata, my former leftist friends, I consider up until 2 or 3 years ago, I was a leftist. I believed the propaganda. And I think the majority of people, or certainly the majority of people who now hate me, are actually sincere in believing that our leaders are good, that Islam is a religion of peace, that hate speech exists. This whole series of what happens is once the fog clears from your eyes, a whole series of dominoes fall down within a very short space of time, because each one implies the other. The question is, how do we fight against that if the system and the people that run it are so corrupt and such a large proportion of people are convinced that it's okay? Big question there, Gavin, sorry.
Yeah, what can we do? What can people do in the meantime? I suppose that comes down to what is the end game going to be. I think the end game is probably going to be some kind of breakdown, some kind of civil, perhaps an economic breakdown. Perhaps the first embarrassing question is, why are our elected politicians doing that? Which I've given you my view on that. The second really embarrassing question is, why are we, members of the public, why do we keep voting for them? Why are we allowing them to do that? I think that the reason is most people, most ordinary people, most of us, well, including me, we are focused on our survival. And that means material survival. And we need to, just to get through the week, make sure there's enough money at the end of the month, particularly if you're responsible for a family and children. So people need to survive, people want to survive, and material survival in a big state society, which is what we have, then material survival involves government, either because your employer is beholden to government in one way or another, or because you need a bit of welfare to support you, which I think is getting on for half the population in one form or another, taking some kind of receiving some kind of government support. So people need that. That's what people are focused on. People don't have the incentive. People don't want to look at other things that completely threaten that whole system. It's too unpalatable, too unpleasant to think about, and also not really what's in your interests, in your immediate interests, which are our survival. It doesn't mean to say we're all shallow and cynical and spineless. It just means we need to survive. Again, a Darwinistic urge to survive and to provide. And the politicians certainly know that. They understand that very, very well indeed. So, I mean, what that would seem to indicate to me, that the end game, the crunch point, the turning point to this is more likely to be economic, some kind of a situation where the system breaks down. And I think that will either happen through economic reasons, unsupportable debts suddenly collapsing the economy, which they could do if interest rates went up sharply, or if suddenly people turned away from the ridiculous bubble in government bonds, and suddenly governments finding themselves going broke. Then what you'd find is they couldn't pay welfare, and the whole system would start. And then if they couldn't pay welfare, you get rioting, which would lead governments to go more broke, which would mean they could pay less welfare. And then the system starts to break down. And at that stage, when people suddenly find, my God, Christ, we're on our own here, then I think people will start making rational decisions, as people tend to do when they're making decisions for themselves, individually, for themselves. So it could be, or it could just be, that Islam collapses the system, because Islam is programmed. You go into an area, commit crime, break the system down, then once the systems break down, you then take over and establish order through Sharia, and it becomes an Islamic area. And so that could break down the system. So I think that probably that is what we're looking at. That is what will change people's minds. And what should people do in the meantime? I would encourage people to just do something so you can at least look yourself in the mirror afterwards. Do something, stand up a little bit. You don't have to get yourself known. You don't have to get yourself prosecuted. Don't go around committing crimes. It's cruel, senseless, and stupid. Don't do it. But just don't get washed over with all the propaganda rubbish, and just stand up and do your little bit. Find something you can do, and get ready for some kind of breakdown in the civil polity, which could be very, very violent. I think in mainland Europe will be just eye-wateringly violent in mainland Europe, extremely violent. And if you stand up now, I think you are less likely to get carried along with a tide of bloodletting if there is a breakdown, and that's important. So I think, yeah, that would be my advice to people. And I don't think there's an awful lot people can do until the main public mood changes. I don't think that's going to change until there's some kind of rupture. Do you follow me?
Yes, I do follow you. It's not a very optimistic way of going out, though. I mean, one of the things, the reason why I've got the YouTube channel is I think we have to do whatever we can possibly do in order to change those public opinions, in order to wake people up. I treat myself, as I said before, as an example. Until 2 or 3 years ago, I was a pretty standard nominal leftist.
Yes.
The kind of person that wants to be nice, that wants to be non-racist, that is very trusting of politicians in general. Occasionally swears about American presidents, but not much more than that. But I think the red pill process is possible. If it's possible with me, then it's possible with lots more people. And I would like to see, before the complete breakdown comes, some kind of democratic turnaround would be a much the better way to go, really.
I don't see that. I just can't see. But partly because the methods that the state uses, the government uses, or the method is coercion and force. And I think that coercion and force will lead to war and a lot of bloodshed. Imagine if you're trying to close a mosque, which is a fortress, and government are just doing it through their meat-fisted, club-handed way. They'll just send in the army to demolish the place. It's a quick way to solve it through bloodletting, is to get the democratic state to do it. And I don't think there's any prospect of them doing it. And there is no call from most of the population, most of us, because we're focused on government providing for us. So we're not going to. We just don't want that at the moment. At the moment, the motivation isn't there. I'm sorry.
Okay. That's not the most optimistic way to finish. We've virtually come to the end, I think, Gavin. I just want to remind people that Gavin's main job or main activity is mosque busting.
Yes.
And what's the best way to get in touch with you? And I repeat, I want to be optimistic about this, and I think your work forms part of over the last, whilst I've been researching you on internet, I watched a lot of Gavin Boby videos recently, and I think essentially your message is we can do something and we can close things down. And one of the most practical ways of doing this, I think there's 2 steps to the mosque issue. The first one has to be not getting them built in the first place, and the second one has to be some kind of monitoring on so-called unacceptable preachers, a closer level of monitoring, and the fact that we know that terrorism is coming out of places like Didsbury Mosque and presumably Finsbury Park, the various well-known mosques around the country. There seems to be a 2-stage process here.
Can you name a mosque that there isn't unacceptable preaching?
No, obviously no. But
okay.
Is there a way? I mean, surely the next stage is, after not getting them built, is to move the legislation to such a stage of where we could get them closed down.
Yes, that's my aim. What I say: slow the tide, stop the tide, turn the tide. At the moment, I slow the tide, want to stop it, then I'd like to turn it. Yes, I think a bunch of mosques need to get closed down. If I can end on an optimistic note, I think we're at the moment the end game looks violent. What I worry about is that we will disgrace ourselves through that violence. I don't want that. That's a matter of shame. I don't want that. I want the English, the British people to be. To preserve the historic moral authority that I think we have. Now, a good way to do that is to stop mosques getting built. Mosques delineate territory. The smaller Islamic territory is, Muslims can militarize it, the less easier it is to weaponize it, to defend it, and the more congested it is, so the harder to defend. And that means that it becomes easier for us to deal with. We are stronger in relation to it, and therefore, if it's easier for us to deal with it, it becomes easier for us to deal with it in a humane way when the time comes. If you're dealing with a stronger opponent with much more defensible territory, it's your range of options is much more limited, and you might find yourself forced into quite unpalatable methods. And so that is another reason to try and to restrict the number of mosques, so that you can treat Muslim people more humanely when you come to address this problem. And so it's just, I think it's essential to stop these mosques coming into place. And if people want to do it, the main thing is to go to my website. There's an email link there. Click that, email me. The website is lawandfreedomfoundation.org. I don't update it very often because there's only one of me and there's only 24 hours in a day. But I mean, if people email me, I will respond.
Yeah. Okay, that's fantastic. I'll put links. You can also, Gavin Boby isn't very active on Twitter, but you can also find him at Gavin Boby on Twitter, at Gavin Boby on Twitter. I have an email contact with him now, so if you want to get in touch with me, if anybody's got any comments for Gavin, then I'll pass them on to him. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, Gavin. I look forward to, I'll definitely be following what you're doing and what's happening, and I look forward to hopefully repeating the conversation sometime in the future with a slightly more optimistic news, I would like to think. Talk again soon.
Okay, we'll win.
Let's hope so.